I think I need to give a bit of context. Having had those three amazing women talk, I think I need to tell you who I am, what I do, why I'm here. So, my name is Patricia DeWally, and I've been in the media for 30 years. I used to present for BBC Radio 2 and also for BBC WM. At the age of 50, I decided to do a gear change because I felt it was time to give back. My parents are from the windrush generation, and I felt somehow I needed to honour them, and I didn't know how I could do that. So randomly, I went to work at Birmingham Children's Hospital, and I was there for 7 years before coming across to work for Central Booking as a senior booking clerk. Now, some people would say, wow, it's a huge step down from Radio 2 to Central Booking, and I'm certain that during the time I've been there, my colleagues have gone, what are you doing here? Okay. But for me, it's about giving back. And I know within the Trust that there are lots of people who have got skills in business and in the outer world who have had a midlife crisis and decided, you know what, it's time to give back. So that's what I do. And very proudly, my area is Handsworth. And so I am a voice for the voiceless, I am a fighter for my people, and I make sure that they get their appointments. But equally, there's such joy when people phone up and they don't speak the language, they don't know how the service works, and it's your job to hold their hands and to get them what they need. So that's part of me. But another part of me is that I am a broadcast journalist, poet and writer. So in the group Writers Without Borders, we were asked to write about childhood. So I have written a piece about Vaseline, which I hope you will enjoy, which is a poem, but also an excerpt from my book called In My Father's Presence. So indulge me. Can you hear it? Okay. Yeah. Vaseline. It's a product that's been around since the 1800s, but for every young black girl from my windrush generation onwards, we wince at the mention of its name. Why? In a time before World War II, when our parents arrived here to rebuild the mother country, and in a time before the £2 billion black hair and cosmetics industry existed, hair products were limited, and they fell into two categories. Men copied the cool Harlem hairstyles that they saw in the papers with Bill Cream and Dax to slick back their hair, and women had Vaseline. The unique thing about Vaseline, like Dettol, was that it was both a bathroom staple used for cuts and bruises and ashy skin, but also the Sunday night menace. Up and down the country, thousands of curly-haired little black girls would sit on the floor between their mostly mother's legs, pinned in as they clasped their knees together to stop you moving, as they opened the blue lid of the Vaseline jar with one hand and produced the venomous, cheap, fine-timed aluminium comb with a pointed tip designed for straight hair in the other, which would gleefully rip its way through our knots, kinks and bed fluff. There was no escape. Monday was school day, and Mom had no time to comb through a clutch of her daughter's braids in the morning. If you struggled, you'd be hit with a comb followed by a shh. Shivers ran through you as you waited for the sharp point of the comb to slice a parting through your scalp, portioning your hair into two bunches. Fists clenched and relaxed as you were fed the illusion of, wasn't that bad? Then the raking began, as the point of the comb ran from widow's peak to neck, as Mum would start to braid a cornrow plait. It felt like payback for a week of childish misdemeanors. Unable to move and unresponsive to winces, grimaces and cries, the comb would rip its way through the debris collected in our hair from our last torturous time it was untangled. Then the soothing coolness of the Vaseline ran the length of the robe. It was balm in Gilead until the task was completed. oblivious to the face of a child full of snot and tears and a premature facelift from tightly tucked plaits. A look of pride would blossom across the face of my mum at the completed hairstyle of her freshly groomed child. The final humiliation, a tartan ribbon firmly secured at the ends, added in the morning just before we left the house. So we had a talk about mindfulness earlier on, and for 10 years I went on silent retreat for 10 days at a time. You weren't allowed to speak to anyone. And it was the biggest gift I ever gave myself once I got over the weirdness of not talking to people. And off the back of that, I wrote a book called In My Father's Presence. But as this is about Black History Month and Windrush, I decided to read the section about my mum and dad coming across in 1958 to this country and what they experienced. So, fate has a habit of playing games with us. Back then, I would have identified myself as being tough, black, working class, and a proud Cockney from the East End of London. Now, I would also add aspiring, but with the limited vistas of ignorance, I didn't know what I was aspiring to. Hackney had always been seen as the gateway, the filtering point of London. In colloquial terms, it was the dumping ground. Wave after wave of immigrants from Huguenots, Jews, Irish, West Indians, Bangladeshi, and now Kurds settled in and made it their home. A place where those fresh off the boat were given the impression that Mother England was a place where the streets were paved with gold, where fortunes could be made by immigrant families who would return home and then would crow about their relative wealth to those who had apparently been too stupid to leave their homelands. The superior colonial lifestyles that they'd witnessed growing up would soon be theirs. Spoils from illusory coffers, overflowing with wealth from the land of milk and honey. The reality, as wave after wave of immigrant families subsequently discovered, was rather different. What the East End did have was that it was the centre of the London rag trade. And my parents rapidly discovered that however educated and land-owning one had been back home, it brought no privileges here. On the level playing field of reality, one only had a limited number of choices: the NHS auxiliary nursing, British Rail train driver, London Transport ticket collector, or a factory machinist. The filtering process of integration happened slowly. If you remained in a tight-knit community that maintained the structure of your society pre-adventure into Britain, you had the possibility of succeeding. If not, the demotivating combination of racism, poor housing, poor education, access to alcohol, gambling, loose party, loose women, spelt the end of hope. Apart from that is religion and God. Even as a little girl, I became aware of the multi-layers of masks that people wore. It became the norm. Through the heady bilinguistics of patois, I understood that in the presence of our neighbours, my parents' sense of betrayal, humiliation and injustice were just about bearable. Everyone was literally in the same boat. Yet another mask of subjugation was worn for the United Friendly Insurance Man, the HP man, the council housing official, school teachers and middle-class professionals. But behind closed doors, it was another matter. The masks came down and the gloves came out. As children, we shouldered the brunt of our father's emasculation and our mother's humiliation at his infidelities. Frustrations built up, and in that environment, all sorts of violations became acceptable. Regular beatings were meted out, and every sort of implement was the order of the day. Fists, teeth, belts, wire hangers, curtain wires, and that was just the entree. As children, mentally and physically, we resembled punch-drunk boxers with no place to rest. Primary school teachers witnessed the welt marks, the bruising, the withdrawn and disruptive behaviour, but they closed their eyes. This was the 60s. The climate then was that domestic and family violence was tacitly acceptable. An Englishman's home was his castle, and his family were his chapel. I and my brother were cut adrift on an island of pain, and it could all be justified with the phrase, spare the rod and spoil the child, and gagged from protesting with the abuse of the Bible. The Bible says you must honour your father and your mother. We were robbed of our sense of self. It's taken many years to understand where my parents were coming from, and with a compassionate eye, I accepted that they only gave out what the shared history of the Caribbean islands taught them. The overseers seasoned and beat my ancestors, who by default were their chattel, into compliance. And although my parents' generation were physically liberated, like many islanders, they were left mentally scarred. And they only carried on traditions by doing the same to us. Righteously unconscious, everything could be mitigated and explained away as long as we had God, and I didn't buy it. These were my contradictory roots. The moment my mum and dad voluntarily walked the gangplank of a ship bound for England, before the St. Lucian dust had even left their shoes, they entered a land of severed choices, and little had changed in the 203 years since slavery was introduced to the islands, except that this time the slaves paid their own passages and the beatings were mostly psychological. This was my vermiculite, the medium in which I grew, a mix of intelligence without opportunity, landed wealth and servants back home versus substandard council housing, a history of private governesses and inner city sink schools, open island spaces versus city life frustrations, and all basted with a healthy dosage of isolating superiority, which covered up a terrifying sense of inferiority. But as a second-generation child, living without fear in the freedom of a capital city, I felt it was time to move beyond my story.